witches.
In through the skin would lead to experiences of, in quotes, flying, which does give us some visual explanation of the standard children's fairy tale of witches flying on broomsticks.
The folklore that we treasure, that has become very much part of our self-image and national pride, sprouts, it seems, from the very great power of narcotic plants. And it shouldn't seem too hugely surprising that this might be so. Even today we spin marvelous tales to explain the mental events that we don't understand. Night horrors, waking dreams, telepathy, all have a magical feel. The sort of magical feel that the plants must have had that were taken by the ancient visionaries. But it isn't only vegetables that have altered ancestral perception in unexplained ways. The constant companion of the witch, almost a succubus or familiaris, was the toad. And the toad oozes evil in almost every culture that represents it. Even for the ancient South American Maya, as far away from ourselves as any group could be. The toad was a beast of frightful dreams. Why has an animal that is harmless, perhaps beneficent, become a universally evil force? Professor William M. Bowden of California University.
Well, the toad always figures into it. Again, Shakespeare always speaks of the venomous toad and the toad that knots and genders and so forth. And toads they've had a bad lot, the poor things. But they do produce from their glands near their eyes, their parotoid glands, an excretion of material called bufotenin. And bufotenin is a very, very powerful material that can cause wild hallucinations, but it must break the blood-brain barrier. And so just by ingesting it, one isn't going to have this experience. But I've wondered quite often if in all that bloodletting and cutting that it goes on in the Maya tradition, if they didn't possibly use the toad skin in that tradition in order to induce altered state of consciousness, because the toad Bufo marinus that occurred in that area and whose bones are found in abundance in Maya ruins do produce this material. And isn't it possible that the Maya may have discovered the secret of breaking the blood-brain barrier using this foamy white stuff that becomes almost waxy after coming out of the parotoid glands and putting this into wounds? This may well have been true in Europe also. And curiously enough, one analysis showed that the mushroom Amanita muscaria, which Lewis Carroll used so well in his Alice in Wonderland, contained bufotenin in the pellicle that covers the surface of the mushroom. So it's possible that these toad skins and have something to do with toadstools.
The folklore that plays on toads and toadstools has thrived on the inaccuracies of the oral tradition. But modern stories that gradually ease themselves into mythology of a more rigid shape depend much more on the written word. While the origins of recent children's tales, like Alice in Wonderland, for instance, may seem more obvious and accessible than those of the ancient shamanistic stories, the sources that shaped them might be just as dark, and even perhaps as pernicious. Rugen Taylor.
The peculiar effects upon Alice of the bottle which says drink me and the cake, I think it is, which says eat me, which make her very small or very large, are paralleled in fact by the experiences of the Siberian Koryak descriptions of the fly agaric. Now, research does seem to indicate that Lewis Carroll had possession of a book which was published in 1862, entitled A Plain and Easy Account of British Fungi by M.C. Cook. And in this book, there was a fairly detailed description of the Siberian Koryak experience, where under intoxication from the fly agaric mushroom, things appear either very large or very small, so that people intoxicated are seen struggling over small twigs of wood, which they perceive to be huge logs, and vice versa. And so it may well be that Alice has been inspired by Siberian accounts of Amanita muscaria intoxication. And of course, the toadstool itself does appear in the story.
But we're still playing a little safe, not yet talking about anything that could change the way we live. So let's plunge in a little further and take a look at religion. No tradition could be defended with more vigor than those with a god at their head, and no faith could provoke more people into seeking historical justification for its truth. So if, for instance, John Allegro, a philologist or someone who studies the original meanings of words, was to claim that the Bible, New Testament included, is nothing but a veil drawn across a mysterious magical mushroom cult, one could anticipate a second crucifixion. Could anyone dare to claim so much?
When you really look into even the Old Testament on its plain level, you realize there are mushroom references there which have never been properly read. For instance, in Solomon's Temple, description of Solomon's Temple, which is just full of symbolic references. Nothing is not just put there for decorative purposes. If you read those decorations in the temple and the way it was built, and the things, the names and whatnot, you realize that this is not accidental. They are all symbolic of the great cosmos, of the great creation of the world theme. Well, when you've got the name of the mushroom appearing quite clearly as the head of the capital, and you realize that it's never been as translated as that, although even the Hebrew is plain as a pikestaff, and it's got a lot of comparative languages which will back that up to the hilt. Nobody's ever translated that way, and one simply, well, why not? Why don't people want to know?
And why not indeed? John Allegro's claims have been rejected by almost all theologians who question his evidence and his speculation. His extraordinary assessment of the Bible, however, goes on to suggest that the book is simply a mystifying translation of a story about the ritual use and religious effects of the fly agaric mushroom. The mystification was an attempt to dupe the Romans into believing that the dangerous and entrenched fertility or penis worship was a harmless fad. It failed, and the early Christians were persecuted for something far more sinister than the broadcasting of love and charity. What then becomes of the great historicity of the Bible, the parables, the people and the events that modern Christians call forward as witness to the truth of the true faith? John Allegro uses descriptions of the mushroom itself, that is, red and white, with a stalk rising from the vulva to a fleshy canopy, to explain very many, even to the Son of God and the Immaculate Conception that brought him onto the earth.
The great mystery to the ancients was, well, how on earth was this thing seeded? It was seeded by a thunderstorm. They appeared after thunderstorms, therefore they were seeded by the god. But otherwise there was no seeding in the normal sense of the term. Between plants they could understand you put a seed in the ground and it sprung up. But this was done miraculously. So you had the idea that the vulva itself was a virgin vulva, unseeded by anything but the power of the god, and then producing the Son of God. And those were the kind of terms they would use of this thing that was extremely powerful. It was a replica of the god. It was indeed a little penis, because God, after all, was the great penis in the sky who was showering everybody with semen every now and again. So this little thing was a sort of child of God.
The stories all over the Bible might be seen to shed their innocent light and reach into the shadows of a murky Hebrew drug culture.
Take, for instance, the book of Revelation, the last book of the New Testament. Now, those first chapters about so-called 7 churches of Asia never did make any sense. They don't make any sense now. But I think they need a good deal more study, and not as trying to describe people in certain churches scattered through the Asia Minor, really, which is rather ridiculous. But if we look at them as possible formulae for the making of certain drugs, then I think we're getting somewhere near it.
John Allegro's revised version. If, however, the stories in the Bible were physical demonstrations of the internal experiences of its progenitors, then the document would have friends in other cultures. While, as Rogan Taylor suggested, witches might have explained the flights of their waking dreams with tales of broomstick-borne elevation, shamans in other parts of the world might have demonstrated their visions with mysterious magical displays, such as, for instance, the Indian rope trick.